that trade can be an act of war, and I think it's led to bad things. Just the attitudes it's brought out in the United States. I mean, we should be looking to trade with the rest of the world, and we should do what we do best, and they should do what they do best. And I don't think it. That's what we did originally. I mean, we were good at producing tobacco and cotton 250 years ago, and we traded it. And we want a prosperous world with 8 countries with nuclear weapons, including a few that are what I would call quite unstable. I do not think it's a great idea to try and design a world where a few countries say, ha, 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 we've won, and other countries are envious. So my import certificate idea, which went no place, I think we've got extra copies, Rob. We've not a great demand for the copies. If anybody did, and if you'd like, and write the office, I think we could probably send you a copy of it. But the main thing to do is not use trade should not be a weapon. And the United States, we've won. I mean, we have become an incredibly important country, starting from nothing 250 years ago. There's nothing been anything like it. And it's a big mistake, in my view, when you have 7.5 billion people that don't like you very well, and you got 300 million that are crowing in some way about how well they've done. And I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's wise.
Well. What is going on, everybody? It is Professor Zeus. Welcome back to the channel. I greatly appreciate you for stopping by. If you're new, thank you so much for stopping by. Go ahead and hit subscribe. We're on our way to 2,000 subscribers. You know, it's funny, a lot of you guys watch my videos, but it's like you guys aren't subscribing. Go ahead and hit subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Guys, today we are looking at some news that, got a lot of people in the financial world buzzing and moving and grooving. Warren Buffett, the legendary investor known as the Oracle of Omaha, he has just announced that he's stepping down as CEO of Berkshire Hathaway after an incredible 60-year run. And, if that wasn't enough, he used the same, Berkshire annual meeting, which is where he was talking at from the video. And he made an interesting statement about President Trump and his trade policies, calling them an act of war and saying that they shouldn't be used as a weapon. And, that's obviously really, really strong words coming from one of the greatest minds when it comes to finance. So, we're going to try to break it all down, why Buffett is stepping down, what he said about these tariffs, and, why his perspective on trade and the markets matters so much. And we're going to look at it from all angles, Buffett's wisdom, President Trump's trade strategy, and, what it means for investors like you and me. So, let's try to break it all down, right? So May 3rd, which was Saturday, at the Berkshire Hathaway, annual shareholder meeting in Omaha, which is also called, I guess, the Woodstock for capitalists, 94-year-old Warren Buffett, he's, dropping a bombshell. He announced that he'll be stepping down as CEO by the end of 2025, and he's handing over the throne to the vice chairman, Greg Abel. And this essentially marks, the end of a 60-year era where, Buffett, he transformed Berkshire from a failing textile company into a $1.6 trillion conglomerate, owning everything from shares in Geico to Dairy Queen to, being a major shareholder in Apple and Coca-Cola. And, Buffett, obviously, he's not leaving entirely. He'll stay on as chairman, and he made it crystal clear he's not selling a single share of Berkshire stock, which got him a 2-minute standing ovation from the shareholders. His kids, who are set to donate most of his fortune after he passes, obviously they're in the loop, but even Greg Abel, he didn't see this coming. So why now? At 94, Buffett, he's obviously he's always been talking about his age. One saying he was just playing, the long game or just some extra games and stuff like that. And this really makes a lot of sense, in order to ensure a smooth transition, right? Because the next person stepping up, Greg Abel, he's been with Berkshire for decades, and he's overseen its, non-insurance businesses. And he's kind of been like Warren Buffett's apprentice, right? So, shareholders obviously feel confident in Abel, but a lot of analysts, like Kathy Searford from CFRA Research, she's wondering if, Berkshire will lose its, Buffett premium, which is kind of like that extra value that's tied to Warren Buffett's legendary status. But we'll see what he'll do. Hopefully he does well. Berkshire Hathaway, they've done amazing in these last 60 years. So hopefully he can take up the reins and keep it going. Now to talk about the other big stuff. At the same shareholder meeting, Buffett, he had some sharp criticism for President Trump and the trade and tariff policies. During this meeting, obviously Warren, he didn't hold back, saying trade should not be looked at as a weapon and warning that tariffs could essentially be seen as an act of war. And he didn't name President Trump directly, but obviously the context was extremely clear. President Trump's America First trade policies have, they've put tariffs as high as 145% on, imports from like places like China. And you guys can see my previous videos where I've covered a lot of what's going on. So, he's, just calling it how he sees it on this global trade war. And, Buffett, he's arguing that, trade is one of America's greatest strengths, and it should not be used, and it should actually be used to, build prosperity, not to make other countries like jealous or envious. He was saying how it's a big mistake when you have, 7.5 billion people who don't like you very well, and then you have 300 million people essentially crowing about how well, they've done. So he also dismissed, recent market volatility, obviously tied to Trump's tariff announcements, as really nothing, pointing to his 60 years of navigating worse market storms. And everybody was making, like, before, I think it was last year, like before the election, Warren Buffett actually pulled out so much money from the market, and everybody's like, yo, why is he doing that? Why is he doing that? And obviously this guy, he's like the oracle, like everybody's saying, because it's like almost like he knew that the markets would be so volatile that he's trying to, save some money. So literally before any of this happened, he pulled out so much money. That's why they call him the oracle. But again, he's not just, trying to throw shade or whatever just for fun. His comments and, pulling out the money from the market, these come from, decades of experience, right? He owns nearly 200 businesses and a $277 billion investment portfolio. And a lot of it is tied to global trade, right? So tariffs hit companies like, Berkshire's railroads, their utilities and retailers by raising costs and disrupting supply chains. And in Berkshire's latest earnings, they even noted that tariffs could have adverse consequences on their operation. But to be fair, President Trump's side has the case too, because the president's arguing that tariffs protect American jobs and force countries like China to obviously negotiate better trade deals. And there was just some news that just came out that Scott Bessent said that they are currently in no talks with China, and the best strategy, or not even the best strategy, but the strategy that America is using right now is to just stay quiet and see if China will come to the negotiation table. And a lot of critics are, including, Warren Buffett, are, warning that tariffs are just going to be a tax on us as the consumers, which is going to drive up prices and fuel inflation. You guys have seen my previous videos. I've laid it all out how it's going to work out. So why would we care, like you and me, the everyday consumer, the retail investor? Why would we care about what Warren Buffett is saying? This guy's track record is impeccable. So it would be careless and nonsensical to not follow what he's doing. He's built a fortune by understanding how markets, trade, and economics work. He's a disciple of Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, and his philosophy is all about focusing on the fundamentals, buying great companies at fair prices and holding them for the long haul, right? And Berkshire has a massive cash pile, right? They have 347 billion as of March cash liquid, right? And that shows Buffett's discipline. He's sitting on that cash because he doesn't see many attractive investments right now. Going back to what I was saying earlier about how he pulled so much money out the market, because it's almost like he knew something was going to disrupt the markets. And he said at this meeting that we've made a lot of money by not wanting to be fully invested at all times. And that's classic Warren Buffett. Be patient, be cautious, and always think about the long term. And when it comes to trade, Warren Buffett, he's a globalist at heart. He's champion, open markets, believing that trade benefits everyone when countries can focus on what they do best. Tariffs disrupt that flow, they hurt the consumers, and risk retaliatory trade wars, which we're already seeing right now. And he said this before. Tariffs played a role in worsening the Great Depression. And Buffett, he lived through enough economic cycles to, see patterns and understand when things are about to, hit the fan. But obviously, we're not going to put Warren Buffett on the pedestal, even though we should look at his insight, because obviously his stance aligns with, Berkshire's interests, and his companies rely on stable trade in order to be successful and prosperous. So someone could argue, he's biased towards policies that keep costs low for his conglomerate or his empire. Plus, President Trump, the tariffs have, sparked debate about whether they are actually bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States or pressure countries like China to rethink trade practices. Again, I will always say 80% of Americans want manufacturing jobs to come back to America, but nobody's willing to, 20% of those same 80 are not willing to replace that office job they've got to go working in the factory or go working in the coal mine. So, as investors, what can we really learn from Warren Buffett's approach? Stay calm, focus on fundamentals and think long term. This is just a reminder not to get caught up in all the tariff headlines or market swings. As you guys know, I said it in previous videos, there's going to be so many different headlines that are coming out. Just try to seed and sift through all these different crazy headlines and find the information that's important. Like he said, things get extraordinarily attractive very occasionally. Patience is key. So, Warren Buffett, he's stepping down and he's calling out President Trump's tariff policies. He's got 60 years of wisdom, and he's telling us to prioritize long-term value over short-term noise. And again, I told you, I think, bringing manufacturing, I think a lot of this stuff makes sense in the long term, but in the short term, there's going to be a lot of noise. So you have to know how to sift through it and how to be disciplined. But let me know your take, man. Are you Team Buffett? Are you believing that all these tariffs are a mistake, or do you think that President Trump, shaking things up, is this for the better? And can people like, Warren Buffett's apprentice, Greg Abel, can they keep Berkshire's magic alive? Let me know in the comments. I try to read as many comments as I can. If you found this video helpful, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so you always get notified when I drop a new video. And never ever forget, it's universe, information, application, execution. Until next time, peace.